Discover the incredible power of emotional control. 7 Transformative Secrets of Stoicism Exposed. Charlie leaned against the cool metal of his workbench, grease-streaked hands trembling slightly as he thumbed through the worn letters from his grandfather. Each faded page was a reminder of the resilience that had run through their family, but today, that stoicism felt like a stone in his gut. Sophie had received a scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Pride and dread tangled in his chest, wrestling for control. No one prepared him for this moment. He envisioned her success and the celebration it deserved, yet, the specter of bills and expenses loomed over him like a storm cloud. He had poured his life into this garage, the only world he knew since he was a kid. Every oil change and tire rotation had been a testament to the values his father and grandfather instilled in him: hard work, integrity, and an unyielding commitment to family. But as Sophie's graduation approached, those values felt overshadowed by fear. Fear that their modest income wouldn't be enough, that she might become entwined in the world of elitism that came with her scholarship. How could he teach her about balance when he was struggling to balance his own emotions? Watching Sophie flourish through her studies had become both a joy and a source of angst for him. The more she succeeded, the more acutely he felt the weight of their difference in backgrounds. "You're just a mechanic," her classmates would snicker, deliberately drawing out the words, a stark contrast to the shiny new cars parked in front of the university campus. Their laughter clung to him, heavy as the tools he wielded every day. What if this was the beginning of her doubts about her roots? His heart sank at the thought. Could he shield her from the sting of judgment, or should he teach her to stand proud in her own skin? Before he could contemplate further, a voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Dad?" Sophie peeked through the garage door, her face radiant with a spark of excitement and a touch of vulnerability. That contrast felt like a sharp knife. She didn't know the turmoil brewing within him. "I got invited to this pre-college mixer," she said, her voice laced with enthusiasm. But Charlie couldn't shake the haunting vision of her in a crowd of peers, their opinions clashing with everything he perceived as valuable. He hesitated, the internal tug-of-war sending a jolt through him. If he encouraged her to go, was he inadvertently pushing her into the jaws of a world that would judge her? But to hold her back felt equally suffocating. The very essence of those letters slid through his mind. Resilience was born of confrontation, of facing life head-on rather than cowering behind the grease-stained doors of their garage. Before he could collect his thoughts, he blurted out the words he hadn't fully grasped yet. "You have to go, Sophie. Just be proud of who you are." It felt like a leap into the unknown. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." But as the words escaped his lips, the dread settled heavier on his shoulders. What if his encouragement was a betrayal? What if this path, once a beacon of hope, turned into a minefield of insecurities? Minutes turned into hours as he remembered her telling him how sometimes she felt like an outsider, the other students' comments weighing her down. He could feel the intensity building within him. Charlie paced the garage, muscles tensed, breath shallow. Each time he thought of their conversations, he felt both desperate to offer guidance yet terrified of exposing her to pain. He needed to confront those judgments, to stand tall and shout about the dignity of their blue-collar roots, yet the nagging voice inside screamed that he might only make things worse. As Sophie prepared for her college mixer, Charlie was trapped between the undeniable yearning to protect her and his own deep-seated anxiety about their world. The air felt thick around him as the door loomed between them. He needed to do something, but what? The stakes felt heavier than ever before, driving him further into emotional chaos with no easy resolutions in sight. Charlie's hands suddenly felt clammy against the metal of the workbench, a harsh contrast to the muscularity and grit his trade demanded. He stole a glance at Sophie, bustling around the garage, oblivious to the internal tempest stirring within him. As she sung along to a catchy tune, focus shifting between organizing her school supplies and glancing over her shoulder to catch his eye, the enticing rhythm of her joy intensified the shadows lurking in his heart. He wanted to savor this moment, to inhale her youthful spirit and bask in her achievement. Instead, each gleeful laugh echoed hollow in his ears, further igniting his inner conflict. Was he right to encourage her? Was he simply a complacent bystander, ready to watch her evolve into someone he hardly recognized? The thought twisted like a knife, deepening the chasm that seemed to divide their worlds. Taking a deep breath, Charlie felt the weight of that decision surge. Maybe he could bridge that chasm. He needed to confront this spiral of dread transforming their family narrative into a fractured story of shame. Yet as she engrossed herself with packing her bag, Charlie sensed the gravity of his silence. His instincts screamed for action. He needed to speak with purpose, to mentor her through the whirlwind ahead. With an uncharacteristic resolve, he approached Sophie and picked up a wrench, twisting it absently in his hands. "You know, Soph, people often forget where they come from," he started, haltingly. "It's like this wrench. It's worn, but it still works. Every scratch tells a story, just like us." Sophie paused, her brow slightly furrowed, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. "What do you mean, Dad?" He took a moment to gather himself, fighting to construct a coherent thought amid the chaos of fear and pride racing within him. "You've achieved so much. But you must remember, those who judge usually can't see beyond their own limited experience. Stand proud in our legacy. We're not just mechanics, we're builders of resilience, of grit. Those pieces of metal they don't mold easily." The words tasted bitter like the rust he often scrubbed from his tools but felt alive as he spoke them. Sophie's eyes met his, burning fiercely with understanding. In that shared gaze, Charlie saw a reflection of himself, someone also molded by determination despite societal expectations. "Thanks for saying that," Sophie replied softly, though doubt flickered in her eyes. "But what if no one sees it? What if they just see a mechanic's daughter?" Charlie felt the familiar pang of protective instinct, then a dawning realization wrapped around him. Perhaps each self-doubt whispered in his daughter's ears mirrored the harsher fears carved deep within him. This was about transcending perceived limits not just for her, but for himself. He needed to assert his beliefs, not as constraints but as stepping stones toward a broader identity. And with that thought, clarity washed over him. "Sophie," he spoke with newfound passion, "you aren't limited by anyone else's labels. Those who mock have blinders on. Show yourself what it means to be who you truly are." In a moment of connection, the palpable tension shifted as Sophie's expression softened, absorbing his message. Suddenly the door to this new chapter wasn't just about Sophie entering the world of prestigious halls but also about Charlie forging a new path of his own, one untethered by his company of familiar fears. As she began to prepare herself for the upcoming mixer, Charlie felt a noticeable shift inside him. The emotional chaos did not dissipate, but rather transformed into something actionable. He would harness this energy to confront the burdens he'd suppressed for so long, starting with a dialogue rather than avoidance. Determined, he pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled through the contacts to a familiar name, one he hadn't called in years. Perhaps it was time to re-establish old connections. But the moment he hit dial, a sense of dread cascaded through him, threatening to consume his resolve. Did he have the courage to face the past? Just as the phone rang, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that this could either become a stepping stone or a stumbling block, setting the stage for a future he had barely begun to envision. The line clicked, and a voice on the other end answered, summoning feelings long buried in questions he was not yet prepared to confront. "Charlie? Is that you?" The voice crackled through the line, a blend of surprise and disbelief. "Yeah, it's me," he murmured, an old ghost settling right back into his throat. This was Dan, a former colleague and friend, someone who had once inspired Charlie in ways he'd long forgotten. "Wow, I didn't expect to hear from you," Dan continued, and Charlie could almost hear him shifting, unsure of how to navigate this unexpected reconnection. "How's life treating you?" "It's complicated," Charlie said, feeling the weight of honesty in his words. "Can we meet? I think I need to talk." There was a pause, and Charlie could feel the tension building on the other end. "Sure, let us grab a coffee." "You still at Joe's? Same time, same place?" "Yeah, I'll see you there." He ended the call, but the sense of dread did not wane. Instead, it coiled tighter around him, mingling with the determination he had just summoned for both himself and Sophie. As he headed to Joe's, memories surged back, images of blueprints strewn across the workbench, laughter over coffee, those late nights when they pushed the limits of their creativity. But mixed in with nostalgia was a nagging fear. Their last encounter hadn't ended well, life had pulled them in opposite directions, and Charlie questioned the motives behind this rekindled connection. Was he strong enough to face the person he had once trusted, knowing the chasm they had created between them? Sitting in a corner booth, he clasped his hands together, the wood's smooth grain grounding him in the moment, urging him to hold firm against the tempest swirling inside. He vowed to approach this meeting with clarity. No longer just a mechanic overhead in grease-stained clothes, he would advocate for himself, reclaiming the stories he shared with Sophie. Dan arrived a few minutes later, slightly out of breath, and presented a warm smile, yet Charlie's heart raced with uncertainty. Who was this person before him, the friend he once held in high regard, or a mere shadow of what he'd become since they last parted ways? "Charlie. It's good to see you." Dan slipped into the booth across from him. "You look different." "Yeah, well, time does that," Charlie replied, striving to keep the conversation light while a more profound vulnerability brewed beneath the surface. "I guess we've both changed." "We all do," Dan replied, leaning in slightly as if searching for remnants of their old camaraderie. "What has been on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Charlie decided it was time to take the leap. "I've been thinking a lot about why we stopped talking. It's complicated, but I'm here because I think I need some guidance. I need to confront what's held me back from being who I want to be, and honestly, I thought of you." Dan's eyebrows knit together in concern, inviting Charlie into honest dialogue. "What do you mean?" "I don't just want to be a mechanic or live in the shadows of my past," he confessed. "I want to embrace a fuller version of my identity, to be more than what others see." He noticed the flicker of recognition in his old friend's eyes, which revealed a shared understanding that perhaps time had eroded the harshness of past judgments. Yet, even amidst this connection, Charlie felt an urgent need to clarify. "But I also don't know how to reconcile this with Sophie. What if our legacies create pressure she can't handle? I want better for us. Charlie, I've been on a journey too. If you want, we can work through this together." Dan leaned back, expression shifting from uncertainty to action. "Maybe it's not about showing the world who you are, but rather embracing who you've always been underneath the grease and rust." As they continued to exchange thoughts, Charlie began to sense that the burdens he carried could transform into lessons for his daughter, while he sifted through the complexities of his own narrative. Perhaps this reconnection was no mere coincidence, but rather an opportunity rather than a stumbling block. Just as he felt the threads of possibility begin to weave through his conversation, Dan's phone rang. Glancing at the screen, his face went pale, and Charlie's instinct blared warnings. Without hesitation, Dan stepped outside to take the call as silence engulfed the booth, leaving Charlie to ponder. Who would sometimes linger in the shadows and challenge his resolve? Could this conversation become a platform for deeper insights, or would it merely stall into uncharted realms? As he stared into the empty cup before him, Charlie braced himself for what lay ahead. The foundation of emotional control he yearned to build was within reach if only he had the courage to withstand what would follow when Dan returned. What truths remained unspoken, waiting to disrupt the fragile connection they had begun to mend? As Charlie sat in the booth, the minutes stretched uncomfortably, each tick of the clock a reminder of the unresolved tension in the air. He let his gaze wander, seeking distractions in the familiar surroundings of Joe's cafe. The rhythmic hum of conversation faded into a dull backdrop as he fought against the nagging uncertainty bubbling inside. What if Dan's phone call was a diversion, a way to slip out of a confrontation for which neither was truly prepared? His thoughts darted back to the conversation they had just started. Charlie had taken a significant step, he had laid bare his wish to evolve beyond labels, but would Dan reciprocate? The prospect of vulnerability loomed large, an intimidating specter shadowing his ambition for change. The cafe door swung open, and Dan returned, his expression slightly strained. Charlie noticed the way Dan's posture was rigid, evidence of a lingering tension. He took a steadying breath, centering himself. "Everything okay?" he asked, striving for an air of normalcy. Yeah, just a minor family issue, Dan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. He shifted awkwardly, still trying to forge a connection as if it were a delicate piece of glass. Anyway, you were saying you wanted to embrace who you really are. Charlie nodded, the urgency of the moment demanding clarity. I've spent too long being defined by my circumstances, someone's employee, Sophia's father, just a mechanic. It feels like there is so much more beneath that surface, but how do I break free from these constraints? A flicker of understanding crossed Dan's face, a reminder that they had once shared creative aspirations. You always had potential, Dan said, leaning in, his voice earnest. But it can be hard to see outside the roles we play. Have you considered what that potential means for you practically? What do you really want? The question pierced through Charlie, demanding an honest reflection he had long avoided. Could he actually envision a future where he was more than a mechanic? The very notion felt indulgent, lofty even. Yet, the flickering flame of hope within him pushed against those doubts. I want to create. Design something to inspire interactive experiences, maybe? I used to love that about my work. Dan's eyes brightened. Then why don't you? It was both a challenge and an invitation, and Charlie realized how rarely he had allowed himself to dream beyond day-to-day survival. I could fail, he stammered, a rush of old fears intertwining with this new aspiration. What if I invest time and energy into something only to fall flat? But what if you don't? Dan countered, his tone softening. What if you succeed? Growth isn't always linear, and sometimes our failures teach the lessons we need the most. Think about Sophie. Isn't your journey a way to inspire her to pursue her dreams, regardless of risks? Charlie mulled over the implications of this connection, prying apart old fears and examining them with a newfound perspective. There was something visceral about tackling fear head-on, especially as it pertained to Sophie. Every decision he made now extended beyond himself. It became a narrative for his daughter, a story of resilience to guide her own choices. Charlie took a deep breath, fortified by the weight of his own realizations. I need to embrace the unknown, to set out even if I stumble. Letting Sophie see me pursue my passion must become part of the legacy I build for us. As they exchanged a renewed hope, Charlie's phone buzzed against the table, a jarring reminder that time continued to march forward, bringing with it remnants of life's heavier burdens. He quickly glanced at the screen, and his heart sank, another reminder of his past, something he wasn't ready to confront. Sorry, I need a moment, he muttered, feeling the connection they had reignite fading into a distant line of smoke. He could almost see Sophie waiting for him beyond the worries that twisted in the back of his mind. Would these challenges lead to resolution, or was he to be haunted by shadows anew? The phone call left unanswered loomed large, pushing Charlie further into reflection. As the urgency gripped him again, he was left questioning if this moment was merely an invitation to step forward or a reminder of all that could go awry. With uncertainty thick in the air, he found himself fighting against the impulse to retreat. Charlie? Dan's voice broke through as if sensing the shift. What's on your mind? And just before he could respond, an even deeper truth crashed over him, demanding to be confronted. What lay ahead appeared to be the moment of truth, the pathway toward reclaiming his identity clashing with the shadowy legacies that still haunted him. Would he take that step, or allow those fears to eclipse his opportunity? The vibrating phone felt like a weight on Charlie's chest, a reminder of responsibilities he had long uplifted without question. He studied the screen, the name glaring back at him, familiar yet laced with regret. As he hesitated, a tension wound tighter around the room, threatening to squeeze the breath out of him. Should he answer? Or should he continue this encouraging conversation with Dan, who was still searching his eyes for answers? Dan, he said suddenly, meeting his friend's gaze with determination. I need to confront my past before I can move forward. The words felt both liberating and terrifying, as if he had released a balloon into the sky, leaving his fate suspended with it. Dan leaned back, absorbing Charlie's admission. What do you mean? You have an opportunity in front of you. Don't let distractions hold you back. But Charlie could feel the weight of his history pressing down. Every unreturned message and neglected issue felt like a chain anchored to his ankle, holding him in place. That call, it's about my old job. A piece of my past I thought I left behind when I decided to pursue something more meaningful. But maybe it's time to face it head on. The cafe around them was abuzz, but for Charlie, the noise faded as he trained his focus inward. He envisioned taking that first step not just for himself but for Sophie too. Could confronting this lingering shadow demonstrate to her that even the first steps are worth taking, regardless of fear? Sometimes, Dan said, a tone of cautious encouragement in his voice, facing the past can be just as important as pursuing the future. Maybe it's an opportunity for closure? Charlie nodded slowly. Closure's such an elusive concept. Just a word that, for him, seemed distant. But how could he attain it? Thoughts fractured, darting like restless fireflies. What had held him back all these years? Regret? Shame? Fear of the unknown? As clarity swept through him, Charlie felt a wave of determination surge. Flinching briefly at the phone's persistent vibration, he made a decision. He wouldn't ignore his past, he would confront it. I'm going to call, he said firmly, surprising even himself with the resolve in his voice. The grip of doubt tightened a degree, but Charlie didn't allow it to suffocate him this time. He had taken the leap before, hadn't he? And he could do it again. The journey to reclaim his identity began with facing the remnants that had tried unsuccessfully to define him. Picking up the phone, he steadied himself against the table. If I want Sophie to chase her dreams, I must model the bravery it takes to tackle the hurdles head-on. Each thought solidified his purpose as he dialed the number, a part of him braced for potential repercussions. With each ring, tension coiled tighter. What would he say? Would they resent his absence or perhaps understand his departure? He had walked away from a mechanical life to explore creativity, almost like flipping an internal switch. Charlie felt his breath grow shallow, but he grounded himself. This call wasn't just about him, it was emblematic of his refusal to hide. Whatever fallout came, it would not define him but rather contribute to a richer tapestry that shaped who he intended to become. As the line clicked, he half listened, half prepared for what might come next. When the voice answered familiar, tinged with a peculiarity of nostalgia, Charlie felt the sharpness of anxiety start to dull. Charlie? The voice held a mixture of surprise and caution, inviting him into a conversation laden with the unresolved. But buried beneath the remnants of his past lay an unexpected truth he was just beginning to grasp. Each choice, step, and confrontation had woven together to construct a pathway of evolution and growth. Hi, he managed while catching Dan's supportive gaze. It's time we talked. The opportunity flashed before him, yet Charlie sensed his journey was just beginning. Would this confrontation bring clarity, or would it unveil further complexities he hadn't anticipated? The moment hung heavy in the air, with the potential for both liberation and turmoil, a catalyst for an undeniable transformation. Charlie? The voice on the other end held the weight of years, a bridge spanning the distance between where he had been and the man he was striving to become. Yeah, it's me. Charlie's heart raced, a conflicting mix of nostalgia and trepidation coursing through him. The familiarity of the name felt like an anchor, but he was determined to float above it. We didn't expect to hear from you. Is everything all right? He hesitated, acutely aware of how much he had changed since his departure. I need to talk about my departure, he began, cautiously stepping onto the uneasy terrain of his past choices. Each word felt laced with vulnerability but also with an imperative honesty that pushed him forward. We've moved on, Charlie. Most of us are thriving here, the voice answered, an undertone of defensiveness penetrating the familiar warmth. The old ache returned, pulsing with the ghosts of old insecurities. He had been part of something, an essential cog in the machine, but opting out had stripped him of belonging. Yet now, he recognized how essential this conversation was to not just resolve unfinished business but to validate the choices that had steered him toward his current path. I understand, he replied, swallowing hard. But I can't ignore how I left things. It's been gnawing at me. Why now? The question sliced through, demanding a deeper reflection that hung heavily in the air. Because I've realized that to move forward, I have to acknowledge my past decisions. It's about more than my guilt, it's about taking ownership of what I abandoned. The line fell silent. Charlie used the pause to reignite his determination. He envisioned Sophie, her young face filled with untainted dreams, and how he wanted to be a testament to tackling fear, even when it stemmed from shame. "Look, I missed the work," he continued, his voice firming. "It was more than a job, it was a part of who I was. But I had to leave to discover who I wanted to become." "People don't just leave like that," the voice responded, frustration creeping in. "You walked away when things got tough." Charlie bristled, the old defensiveness rising unbidden. "And now I need to confront that decision. To explain it. Not just to you or the team, but to myself." Every heartbeat resonated with a new clarity as he breathed in, reminding himself this wasn't merely about justifying his actions. It was about recognizing how they had shaped him. If he could own this part of his life, perhaps he could help Sophie understand her journey in this relentless world. "How did you think you'd come back, Charlie? You can't just waltz back and act like nothing happened." The voice deflected with certainty, colliding with the uncertainty that loomed over their conversation. "No," Charlie acknowledged, his composure steadying. "I don't expect a warm welcome, but I need to initiate the conversation before I fly forward, turning my back completely. I don't want to regret this space between us." Frustration and sadness wrapped around him like an old cloak as he fought for each breath. The conversation was morphing in exploration rather than a confrontation, a chance at mutual understanding rather than retribution. "So, what do you want from this?" The voice softened, curiosity replacing anger. "I want to understand what I did to us and find closure. I also want a chance to express my growth since leaving, to show that though I stumbled, I'm still forging ahead." Silence draped the line again, but this time it felt like an opportunity waiting to unfold. "Your growth?" the voice inquired, skepticism laced within it. "Yes. I've realized that I've developed resilience, creativity, and I'm learning to be transparent with my emotions. I want to explore that with all of you." "Interesting," came the careful reply. "It'll take more than words, you know." Charlie leaned back, contemplating this moment of vulnerability. Words were just the beginning. Would they be willing to see beyond the failure? "What if I show you?" he replied suddenly, caught up in the moment's momentum. "Let me pitch a project, something that can reflect the ideas I've been exploring since I left. A chance for all of us to evolve together, in a different capacity." "Are you serious?" The surprise in their voice mixed with curiosity piqued Charlie's interest further. "Yes," Charlie replied, a newfound resolve threading through his words. "But I need your trust." Simple as that. The challenge lay ahead, more than just a conversation. This was about leading with actions, a chance to break the chains of the past. A spark ignited within him, and for the first time, he sensed the full weight of what lay ahead, a moment of confrontation that could yield redemption, clarity, and perhaps a pathway to a future of belonging anew. "What do you think?" he asked, the tension pulling tight once again. Would they embrace this unexpected shift or reject it, building walls against his intent? The answer felt just on the horizon, but as he waited, Charlie realized he was ready to meet whatever response awaited him. Finally addressing the shadows they had cast in silence. The fight wasn't over, and as the moment hovered, it opened the doorway to deeper transformations. As he breathed in, Charlie could feel the intricate birth of hope and anxiety intertwining. The artistry of his evolution was only beginning. What revelations would come to light as these threads began to weave through new connections? The breath of silence hung heavy between them, a fragile bridge swaying in the winds of uncertainty. Charlie could almost hear the thoughts tumbling through the mind of the person he was speaking with. Unfurling the imagined conversation in his mind, he wondered how his proposal would be received. "All right, let us hear it," the voice finally replied, threading back into the conversation with an edge of trepidation. Charlie felt both relief and anxiety swell within him, a tempest brewing as he prepared to unveil his idea. This was his chance to reclaim his narrative, to demonstrate his transformation through actions instead of mere words. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, visualizing Sophie's bright eyes and countless dreams. "I envision a project that taps into our shared experiences, the struggles and triumphs we've weathered together. Something that's not just a return to form but a bridge into the future, a way for us to reclaim what we lost." Interesting concept, but you'll need specifics, came the guarded response. Charlie ignited his determination. Imagine a series of workshops that blend our professional skills with personal growth initiatives. We could invite guest speakers from various fields who can share their insights on resilience, creativity, and emotional transparency, anchoring the discussion in our collective past while illuminating pathways ahead. He could hear the tapping of fingers on a keyboard, weighing his words, and he focused on the flutter of fluttering hope within him. These sessions can be both reflective and interactive. I want to foster a community that learns from each other's mistakes, just as I've learned from mine. Forgive me if I'm skeptical, the voice countered. You left without a word when the pressure mounted. Why should we put our trust in you now? Charlie's heart sank slightly. Old wounds had a funny way of reopening, pushing the insecurities he thought he had buried back into the light. Yet, he leaned into it, feeling the pressure of vulnerability sharpen his focus. I know how I left was abrupt and selfish. I'll carry that weight forever. But I'm different now. I spent this time learning to confront my fears and failures. I want to channel those lessons into something positive, for myself and the team. Silence followed again, but it felt less like a damning verdict and more like the resonance of contemplation. Charlie could sense the doubt shifting slightly, a crack in the wall of resistance that could be widened with the right nudge. What if this backfires? The voice ventured cautiously, still testing the waters. Then I'll own it, Charlie replied, grounding each word in earnestness. This is about my journey of rediscovery, and if it goes sideways, I'll take responsibility. But the opportunity to attempt to reignite our connection, feels far more worthwhile than navigating away from it altogether. The air thickened with anticipation as his heart drummed steadily in his chest, the rhythm of his own resolve echoing deep within. Would they join him in this exploration, or would the shadows of the past loom too large? What you propose is ambitious, the voice said, softening. But you need to understand, trust is hard-won. Let us say we consider this. Show us what you've got. Can you prepare a presentation? A rush of adrenaline surged through Charlie, igniting a spark of exhilaration. Absolutely. I'll dive into the structure right away and gather resources to support our goals. Okay then, the voice responded, a note of cautious optimism woven within the tone. Let us see where this takes you. As the call ended, Charlie set the phone down, heart racing but filled with an exhilarating clarity. This was a pivotal moment, not just in re-establishing his connection with his old team, but in cementing his identity in a new landscape where vulnerability and strength coalesced. The echoes of unresolved feelings from his departure remained like distant specters, but now they intertwined with an awakened anticipation. He was on the threshold of change, facing an opportunity to redefine not only his relationship with others but his relationship with himself. But with the momentum building, Charlie knew there was still a darkness lurking. How would those on the team view him long-term? Would they lean into this change together or push him back into the corner from which he had emerged? As he navigated his next steps, a looming question reverberated in the corners of his mind. What awaited him on this path of redemption, and could he truly forge a new legacy from the ashes of his past? Charlie sat at his cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and notebooks filled with ideas and reflections. The chaos mirrored his mind, which was racing with thoughts of his upcoming presentation. Each resource he intended to gather felt like a weight to be shouldered. He needed to produce something meaningful, something that not only reflected his growth but also had the potential to bring his team back together. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on his breath, allowing the noise from the outside world to melt away. This moment of stillness was crucial, the calm before what he anticipated would be a storm. Confidence surged within him as he recalled the conversations that had reshaped his perspective over the months. Therapy, workshops, and self-reflection had armed him with tools to unlock a deeper understanding of himself. Now, it was time to put that knowledge into action. Flipping open his laptop, he began to type notes on potential workshop themes. Emotional intelligence, mindfulness practices, storytelling as a form of therapy. Each subject felt like a thread ready to be woven into a fabric of collective healing. But what weighed heavily on him was how to convey these ideas without sounding preachy or insincere. Authenticity was paramount. He needed to connect, to pierce through the wall of skepticism that remained among his peers. As he crafted bullet points and organized topics, he recalled the reason behind his initial departure. Fear had gripped him. It was the sensation that had always fed into his impulsiveness. The instinct to flee had been his learned behavior, a response to pressure that he was intent on challenging this time. Would his honesty in addressing this topic resonate, or would they see it as another moment of self-indulgence? That doubt coiled in his stomach, tightening with every thought. Each segment he wrote brought about a different introspection. He began to wonder how would he react if someone unveiled their struggles so openly in front of him. How would the trust be built from such raw vulnerability? Perhaps by sharing not only what he had learned but also what he had lost in that tumultuous departure, he might carve a path for them to rediscover their shared connection. With each passing hour, the presentation morphed from a checklist of professional goals into something deeper, a manifesto of acceptance and evolution. Charlie realized the urgency of not just aiming for success but also confronting the tumultuous emotions that accompanied such a trajectory. It was a delicate balance between ambition and grounding. He needed to showcase his growth while never disconnecting from the humble root of his journey. After several hours of intense focus, Charlie leaned back, his fingers momentarily still over the keyboard. The danger of this upcoming presentation was no longer about merely convincing others, it was about confronting the specter of his past. He had long viewed his departure as a singularly personal failure. But perhaps it was a collective scar, one they might all share. Yet, hiding beneath that burgeoned excitement was a gnawing fear. What if they rejected him again? What if the teen chose to remember him as he had been, rather than who he was striving to become? As he collected his thoughts, the clock ticked insistently. Time was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. In that moment, a new revelation struck him. What if he could invite his team to engage with their own past? What if he positioned them not just as spectators but as co-creators of this healing journey? It would require the courage to embrace vulnerability on all sides, but therein lay the true potential for collective empowerment. With this newfound vision taking shape in his mind, Charlie realized that he was not just seeking to redeem himself, he was setting the stage for a more significant dialogue, one that could redefine not only his relationship with others but the essence of the collective experience they had all shared. Tomorrow would not be merely about presenting a series of ideas, it would be an intimate act of communal vulnerability. And as the prospect of sharing his truth loomed ahead, so did the anxiety. What awaited Charlie at that first presentation could alter the trajectory of their interactions forever. Would he rise to meet the challenges before him, or would the ghosts of his past overwhelm him again? The sun had barely risen when Charlie found himself pacing the small confines of his apartment, rehearsing the words that felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying in his mouth. Each phrase echoed a truth he had cultivated over months, yet the prospect of sharing it with his colleagues filled him with a strange blend of anticipation and apprehension. The reality of doing more than just presenting, of opening a dialogue, loomed like a figure in the distance, taking shape but still too far to touch. He paused at the window, drawing in the crisp morning air. It was a small ritual that grounded him, reminding him of the stakes. Shadows of his past failures flickered like reflections in a still pond, moments of vulnerability that had either defined him or drawn him back. The journey out of those depths was not merely personal, it was a shared venture that required him to step beyond himself, to risk opening the door just enough for others to glimpse inside. He grabbed a notepad, jotting down points of emphasis he wanted to convey. He realized he couldn't just rely on theoretical concepts. He needed a personal story to anchor his reasoning, a tangible testament to his growth that could help break down the barriers of skepticism. Diving deep into the core of his fears, he recalled the vivid moment he had walked away from the team, consumed by panic, a moment that still left a bitter aftertaste. As the clock ticked closer to the time he had to be at the office, a creeping doubt reared its head again. What if his story was dismissed? What if the team failed to see the lessons he had learned? The fear of rejection bubbled up, threatening to cloud his clarity. He reminded himself that the act of sharing was not just about his narrative but about inviting openness among peers, a call for camaraderie and vulnerability. Staring at himself in the mirror, he rehearsed the words aloud, striving to infuse them with conviction. "It's about connection," he murmured, only half convincing himself. If he could create an atmosphere where honesty and shared experiences outweighed the chatter of doubt, perhaps they would find their way back to each other. But convincing himself was only half the battle. He had to channel that conviction when the moment arrived. Once at the office, the hustle around him felt like an orchestra warming up, notes of chatter, laughter, and the soft drone of keyboards crafting a chaotic yet strangely comforting symphony. As he approached the meeting room where they would gather, he could feel the pressure rising in his chest, each heartbeat syncing with the rapid flutter of his thoughts. This was not merely a room filled with colleagues. To him, it felt like the battleground where old ghosts would either be laid to rest or reawakened. The meeting began. As his colleagues filed in, Charlie took a deep breath, grounding himself. He introduced the theme of the discussion: how their past experiences shaped them and their work. Each face in the room reflected various degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Some were warm, some guarded, and a few visibly dismissive. He acknowledged their apprehensions, addressing the awkwardness that often surrounded vulnerability in a professional sphere. "Today isn't about me, it's about us," he declared, the words tumbling out with surprising ease. The shared history had been fraught with highs and lows, and while many faced personal challenges, he hoped this session could light a spark for them all to find common ground. The silence that followed was palpable, a charged space waiting for something to ignite it. As he began to share his own story, the pain of his departure, the lessons etched into his journey, he could see them leaning forward, an unspoken shift breaking through the veil of skepticism. Every eye on him seemed to absorb the raw honesty emanating from his words, and in that moment, something within Charlie clicked. He wasn't just confronting his past, he was inviting them to engage with their own, forging connections that ran deeper than professional facades. Amid the discourse, he felt the pulse of vulnerability shift from his chest into the room, a shared heartbeat. And just as he sensed the atmosphere beginning to transform, the sudden weight of a familiar face snagged his focus. It was Sam, the team's lead, whose quiet reputation as a hard-nosed colleague loomed larger than his stature. Sam's arms were crossed, skepticism framing his expression as if preparing for battle. "Are you really asking us to share our weaknesses in front of the team?" Sam challenged, cutting across the tension with sharpened precision. In that moment, Charlie recognized that the presentation would not only be about shared vulnerability but also about addressing skeptics head-on. Would he crumble, or could this encounter fortify his resolve? It was his opportunity to confront not just one man, but an entire shadow of doubt. His own resilience hinged right there on the precipice of a question. The moment had come to face not just his fears but the beliefs that had separated them. "Yes, I am," he responded, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty within. It was time to evolve from potential to action, not just for himself, but for every one of them. As the words hung in the air, Charlie realized they stood at the edge of something profound. Would they rise together, or would the tradition of silence shackle them once more? What stories might linger in the shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them into the light? The atmosphere in the room hung thick with both apprehension and curiosity as Charlie stood his ground, the air charged with unspoken potential. The relationship he had with his co-workers was shifting, doubts lingered, but his commitment to authenticity was overpowering. "Let me clarify," Charlie continued, gathering his thoughts with renewed clarity. "We all have experiences that have shaped us, moments that resonate well beyond our roles as just colleagues. If we can harness that power, we open ourselves to deeper connections and insights. This isn't about vulnerability as weakness, it's about showing how our journeys, however imperfect, have led us here, making us the professionals we are today." The silence in the room became thick with contemplation, the shift palpable as some began to nod, the vulnerability he shared inviting them to a potential solidarity. For Charlie, it wasn't merely about reforming past bonds, it was about transforming the narrative that had defined him for far too long. "Tell us something real, then," snorted Sam, yet behind the tough facade, there was flickering curiosity. "What does sharing the pain of your departure have to do with our projects?" Charlie took a breath, embracing the moment. "The fear I felt when I left was overwhelming. It stemmed from the pressure to perform and conform to what was expected of me, a narrative that had long dictated my decisions. Instead of addressing those emotions, I ran. But running doesn't solve anything. It just prolongs the inevitable." He scanned the faces in the room, reading glimmers of empathy where skepticism once reigned. "What if we could redefine our narratives together? What if we could create a culture that honors our journey, one that holds space for both success and struggle?" The silence turned into something warmer, an atmosphere ripe for dialogue. Charlie continued, seizing the momentum. I'm proposing that we hold a series of workshops to address our collective experiences, develop emotional resilience, and learn from one another. Each of us deserves to grow, not just as employees but as individuals. As feelings of uncertainty crested before him, Charlie pressed onward. I spent years overlooking how crucial it is to embrace those moments of vulnerability, connecting my journey to yours, showing Sophie that confronting fears can be a strength, and that our experiences, even difficult ones, hold the keys to our growth. A hand shot up from the group this time. It was Sarah, one of the quieter members of the team. I'd love to be part of that. Speak about my own experiences. A few weeks back, my cousin passed away, and I realize I've been struggling, yet I went to work as though nothing happened. A ripple of murmurs filled the room, revelations cascading like the shapes of phoenixes emerging from ashes. Others chimed in, weaving threads of stories that spanned struggles with personal and professional lives. The dynamics shifted. They became storytellers, unveiling their burdens, carrying their sentiments like badges of honor into this new moment. Charlie felt not just connected to them but also reconnected to himself. In their vulnerability, courage sprouted, and new ideas exchanged hands as the conversation widened deep into shared understanding, forging a committed recognition of what it means to belong within a community. The presentation had morphed into a catalyst, a crucible for collective growth. They discussed the structure of the workshops, agreeing that each session would allow space for personal narratives. They brainstormed with fervor, ideas flowed, weaving between accountability, authentic connections, and creativity, building excitement where fear had once dwelled. As Charlie left the meeting, the air felt lighter. He had shed heavy layers of self-doubt, discovering not just acceptance but also a newfound confidence that surged through him. Their agreement to explore uncharted territory together had not only reignited his professional aspirations but also molded a legacy for Sophie, a testament to courage and the necessity of confronting fears. Days turned into weeks, and as the first workshop approached, he sensed a vital rhythm building within the team. Individuals expressed vulnerability like rare gems uncovered in a mine, tension transformed into kinship, and shared experiences morphed into lessons that projected paths forward. The ultimate achievement arose as they came to understand that their struggles did not dictate their worth, rather, they formed part of a collective narrative that led to growth, resilience, and inspiration. Each member began to embrace a keener sense of identity, not only as co-workers but as co-creators in pursuit of excellence collectively. When Sophie attended the first workshop, she became a part of the unfolding narrative Charlie had long wished for. With pride swelling in his heart as he watched her share her own story, he knew he had conquered not just the fears that had held him hostage but had also demonstrated to her the potency of embracing challenges, embracing who they are, and learning to rise. With a firm sense of recognition behind him, Charlie had successfully navigated his journey into reclaiming his identity. It wasn't merely professional success at stake, it was the embodiment of resilience in ways he had never imagined, the acceptance of failures transformed into guidelines for future aspirations. He walked away from that workshop, not just buoyed by the success of the session but registering profound satisfaction in understanding that personal achievements spring from confronting internal struggles. Charlie had finally emerged on the other side, revitalized by a sense of collective belonging and personal fulfillment. He was not just a mechanic anymore, nor solely a father, he was a force of transformative growth, a legacy rooted in resilience, pride, and authenticity. Now, as the journey continued, an echo lingered in his mind, a call to embrace new possibilities, to recognize that every hurdle faced head-on became a stepping stone toward achieving his destiny, one rooted in undeniable strength and the spirit of connection. This is the moment to champion transformation. Subscribe now to the channel to never miss exclusive emotional stories that inspire change. Leave a like to fuel this message, comment your thoughts on Charlie's journey, and share this conclusion with at least 5 friends who need to hear this triumphant transformation. You need to show your support now, don't wait even one more second to share.